The first thing that we want to do is style our body. And again, we're in CSS, so the syntax is a little bit different. In this case, we name the tag, but we don't use the carets. And then all of our styles need to fall between these curly braces. And this is where the second link I've got up here is going to come in. And we're going to use just one of the many, many characteristics of the CSS Flexbox, which you can find on W3 Schools. So one of the benefits of Flexbox is here we are defining one little box, but we're actually not defining its width. And then we can have that width be automatically derived from this blue container. So if we put 8 of them in there, they're all going to expand to just the right size and they'll all be exactly the same. And you can see that there's many, many characteristics you can use with Flexbox, but all we care about is to use it for its centering characteristic. So the first thing we'll do is to steal display flex, and I'll come back to Atom, and I'm putting that here into the body, and then I will go back to here and do a find for the term center, and I can see here justified dash content colon space center and semicolon. So I'll paste that in right there. And then when I open this up in my index page, let's see what we've got. Great, so we can see the Flexbox is taking care of the centering. If I take this little guy and kind of collapse the window, you can see we preserve our centering. But right now the background is white, the text is unstyled, so it's just not very interesting. So now let's get in here and start to apply some of the box model that we've been talking about. Okay, back over into Atom, we'll go to My Style, and let's make the background some color. Let's just say pink, for example. And if we get lucky, we'll find out if that word is actually mapped by CSS or not, and I can just keep popping back and forth between my website and my index and my CSS page. You'll notice that I'm not uploading these to GitHub every time because that turnaround takes a little bit too much time. Okay, so back over to Atom. If we look in our index page, we can also see we need to style container and content box, and we need to write those exactly the same. So I will add hash mark, because that's how we precede an ID, and I'll say container. And then I'll make a hash mark and content box. The first thing I'll tell it is background white, but if you want to start practicing your hex, you can say hashtag FFF. I'll save that, refresh it here. I can see we're off to a good start. Now if we want those boxes to have a little bit more space, right, we can have something that's more like, let's do padding. And we might make that, say, 15 pixels. Back over to here, refresh it. Okay, that's starting to look a little bit better. So next up, we want to get a little bit more space between each of our content boxes. So if you think about what padding does, padding works on the inside of a particular div, so it makes space between the content and the edge of the div, whereas margin is going to push out against divs on the outside of a particular area, right? So if I just say margin is 15, for example, and save it, we can see what effect that has. And that's starting to look pretty good, but one thing to note about this is that margin means it pushes out on all sides. So sometimes this causes problems at the top and the bottom of a div where there's a more visual definition, because the margin will be pushing away at something that's no longer there. So in this case, I'm going to do this a little differently, and I'll just say margin dash bottom is 15 pixels. And if I refresh this, you can see that now it's no longer pushing away at the top. Although if we're trying to make a website, this still doesn't look all that website-y, right? So first of all, these boxes need to be bigger, and then they also probably need to be offset from the top a little bit. So in order to accomplish that, I'd like to move this entire unit as one piece, as opposed to having to set the margin on an individual element, because maybe I want the margin at the top to be 150 pixels, but I don't want that big of a division between each of these divs. So to accomplish that, we go back to Atom, and that's where we can start messing with our container. The first thing we have to establish is that we're using a particular type of positioning, and so in this case I'll just say relative. It's not something you have to worry much about. Ooh, it looks like Adam doesn't like putting a space in there, but I like a space. So position relative, which is basically relative to the other items in our HTML. And now I can say top, say 150 pixels or something like that. If we go back and take a look, that might even be a little bit too far. So let's bump this back to 100. And just so we can see what's taking place, let's make the background a color temporarily. CCC is just like a light gray. Oops, got to put a hash mark in there. Oh, interesting. It's not rendering. What did I do wrong? So position relative, top 100, and background CCC. Huh. Let me try saving that one more time. Yep, looks like I just didn't hit the save button hard enough. So here the gray sort of lets us know what that container is doing, and it's okay that the container stays invisible because I don't need all that many borders and divisions and so forth. It'll start to look too heavy, but that shows you how the overall container is being positioned 100 pixels from the top, and then our margin is what's taking care of the gaps in between our divs with this little orphan margin at the bottom as well. Okay, so finally, I think I'll also give this a little bit more of a width. So let's say we switch this out to maybe width 500 pixels. Save it and go back and refresh that. That's looking good as well. And then we might pick up some of our old lorem ipsum as a way to give us more to look at. So let's just generate, say, 5 paragraphs. And then I'll copy each of these paragraphs into our HTML instead of the word hello. So there's paragraph 1, and so forth. And this is really helpful so you're not just looking at the same text over and over again. It's more naturalistic, and it'll also show us how our design is a little fluid, so it can deal with a paragraph that's either shorter or longer, depending. So I'll save that, refresh it back over here. It's starting to look good, and then finally I can come back to my CSS, delete the background color characteristic, and refresh it over here. And now this is starting to look like an actual website.